Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 21st of March 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. Well, Plymouth, blue sky, sunshine, absolutely glorious. A little bit on the chilly side. So we're doing okay. It's apparently sunny in Rhondda. Norfolk is a little bit overcast. And Hampshire, I think, is sort of silvery sky, so not a lot of sun there. And bright in Glasgow, according to the chat box. So it's not all bad, Mike.
Indeed.
No. Well, we're going to cheer people up on a variety of fronts today, I think. So we better start with the referendum.
Well, this is the Express, really describing how Europe, well, they're given the reason why there's so much effort to sort of institutionalise and federalise Europe as quickly as possible at this point. Because now that Britain has played its card and demanded a referendum. Apparently France and Germany want the same. So Germany already, we've already heard of calls in Germany for this. Now the French want it as well. And the polls are suggesting that 33%, well, they're saying that 53% of French would vote in favour of holding a UK-style referendum. And they're saying that I think 33% of French people would back a Frexit, as they're calling it, and 45% would vote to remain, 22% undecided. So what can you say? Europe falling apart, except for a few people at the top of the tree attempting to hold it together as quickly as possible. In the meantime, there was this petition on the UK government petition website asking to allow 16 and 17-year-olds. This, of course, was something that the Lords had wanted. Well, the government has responded to this by saying, as an issue of national significance, the parliamentary franchise, which starts at 18, is the appropriate starting point. The UK government has no plans to change the voting age. And it goes on to say that the franchise for the European Union referendum is based on the franchise for the UK parliamentary elections, with the inclusion of members of the House of Lords who can vote at European parliamentary elections in Gibraltar, apparently. Well, frankly, the franchise, which of course is the right to vote in a public election, in this case, the parliamentary franchise is what's being used for the EU referendum. And we'll just remind everybody that that means that it's not just UK citizens that get to vote in this, it's also Irish citizens. And we'll also remind people that having spoken to the Irish equivalent of the Electoral Commission, nobody other than Irish citizens were entitled to vote in Irish referenda on the European Union. So it does seem slightly strange that the UK government has decided to use what they're describing as the parliamentary franchise as the basis for this.
I think it's known as rigging the elections, Mike.
Certainly one aspect of it. IDOX, IDOX. People might want to have a look at that and see who's actually counting our votes.
Well, yeah, names are coming out in the public domain as to who is controlling things, but what we are hearing is that there's a great deal of suspicion as to the accuracy, the reliability of this up-and-coming referendum. And this is just on the sidelines, but people are clearly looking in the right direction because somebody kindly sent us this. And it's a Breitbart article by Aaron Klein pointing out that a key George Soros board member is head of one of the firms that's running the online elections in Utah. And if you get into the body of the article, it starts talking about the Smartmatic Group, an electronic voting firm, worldwide headquarters located in the UK. But they're the trusted firm to be running the online balloting process in Utah Republican open courses on Tuesday. The chairman is none other than Lord Mark Malloch-Brown, who just happens to be on the board of George Soros Open Society. And I believe he was chairman of actually George Soros Fund, so he's obviously a major player. So the moment we get into electronic control of votes, we've really no idea who is actually behind them, who can get into them, who can manipulate them, and who can control them. But I think we're getting a little bit of a pointer from that particular article.
If I remember rightly, Mark Malloch-Brown served in Gordon Brown's
yes, he
cabinet.
did.
Yeah.
Started out by causing some furore by moving into very expensive accommodation in London. I think some of which was paid by the UN. He's also very big in the UN, of course. But the UN is all about open and transparent world government. Government.
Finance then. I thought this was a great article on the Financial Times. Central banks prove Einstein's theory, not the theory of revolution. This theory of relativity here. This is by Diana Cholyev, who's chief economist at Lombard Street Research. And she's saying the Fed, the Bank of Japan, and the European Central Bank have not learned the lessons of the financial crisis. She says Albert Einstein is said to have defined insanity as doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. By failing to change their way of thinking since the global financial crisis, the world's main central banks are proving Einstein right. And she goes on to comment on the various comments in the financial press about heads of the various central banks not having any further firepower. She's saying they still have plenty of firepower, but she says it's not that the central banks are not doing enough, it's that their policies are misguided and are hampering the correct outcome. And she says, first, if an economy is drowning in debt, the solution is not to pile on even more debt. Second, no one wins from competitive devaluation, so that's the currency wars. Third, tepid growth since the crisis shows that a short, sharp adjustment and purging of past excesses is better in the long term than prolonged attempts to preserve the economic status quo. So it's quite unusual to see somebody who would be considered to be in the heart of the financial establishment actually making some sensible observations here. And as if to sort of echo that, here is the head of the Bundesbank, who's saying that helicopter money, as it's described, is not manna from heaven. He's saying free cash doled out to citizens in a bid to stimulate spending and inflation would end up costing Eurozone states and therefore taxpayers. And as I say, that's according to the head of the German central bank, which still exists, at least as a notion, even though the European Central Bank is there over the head of it. Helicopter money is not manna that falls from heaven. It could actually rip huge holes in central bank balance sheets. So that's two examples of common sense coming from financial commentators and financial system insiders. It's quite unusual.
This is the good thing, Mike, about the truth coming up to the surface within the establishment, because there are good people buried in it, but a lot of them have been suppressed. Now, of course, we're getting more facts coming out. They've got an opportunity to comment. So the truth and exposure, powerful, whether it's in the money sector or not.
And continuing this subject for a second, this is from a few days ago, but the Financial Times here pointing out that hedge fund closures have returned to crisis highs. They're saying that more hedge funds closed their doors in 2015 than at any time since the financial crisis. So they're saying that it was the worst year for liquidations, with 979 funds closing, and that was up from 864 in 2014. And they're making the point that trend following and quantitative hedge funds are being hit the worst because obviously, well, it may not be obvious, but the fact is with the financial system being so turbulent as it isn't really possible for trends to form. And so these trend followers tend to suffer as a result. But of course, it's not all hedge funds are trend following hedge funds, and it's not just trend following hedge funds that are suffering. This is Valeant, and one of a number of this type of hedge fund. So another one is Turing Pharmaceuticals, and these Valeant here, their shares were down 10%. That's as a result of them defaulting on a $30 billion debt. But Valeant and Turing are two examples of a breed of hedge funds that have come along in recent years that are effectively buying up pharmaceutical companies, small pharmaceutical companies that make generic drugs. And what they then do is they take the price of generic drugs and they add zeros on the end. So, for example, Turing Pharmaceuticals, they produced a medication called Diaprim, and they changed its price from $13 per tablet to $750 per tablet. And Valeant did something similar with heart medication. But despite the fact that they are sort of playing with people's lives in this way, they still haven't seemed to have been able to make a business success of it, at least. So perhaps we'll see some of these parasitic companies disappearing.
Which wouldn't be a bad thing.
Indeed.
Well, let's have a look at the quality of our MPs. The topic is, of course, sugar. So we'll come in at the Sun's angle, which is it's all a bit of a joke. And there's quite a bit on the internet at the moment about this man, Chris Bryant, creating fun and laughter in the Commons because he's been teasing the Chancellor, George Osborne, over his Coke habits.
Oh, it wasn't anything to do with
Sorry,
underpants?
cola habits. This is what the joke is about. So Chris Bryant had the few in Parliament listening to him, laughing in their seats as he poked fun at George Osborne over the sugar tax and its effect on Coke. He said, "I'm delighted that finally the Chancellor has realised the danger of Coke. It's just a shame he couldn't bring himself to use the word himself and use the word cola instead. Maybe you can explain to us why." So it was all very jokey, but I think we should just remind ourselves that this is the very same Chris Bryant who believes that as a Member of Parliament he can advertise himself on the internet with Y fronts, and we won't go into the rest of it. Of course, he's not alone in the Labour Party because the Conservatives with Brooks Newmark were up to exactly the same thing. But this is the standard of our MPs. And they're laughing and joking about Coke, but there seems to be a lot more going on. So this is some more of the Sun headlines. Fizzy rascal, George Osborne's bonkers sugary drinks tax. It's all nonsense, Mike, apparently. Well, we don't think so, and we'll take you on through. So here's a bit more of the Sun, and it's the bonkers sugary drinks tax. Could double prices, and it's going to hit the poor. So that naughty George Osborne. But what they're really doing, and you can see it here quite clearly, is this is a list of common drinks. None of these I touch, but it's all showing how much sugar is in, and the more sugar that's in, the more tax they're going to pay. So when you get to the bottom, what we've got is a brilliant advert for Diet Coke, because of course it's saying, well, we don't have sugar in it. So here's George Osborne actually promoting Coke, but the key thing is that we're not promoting sugar. What we are doing is now starting to push the public towards artificial sweeteners. So let's bring in an expert, and here he is, Jamie Oliver, and as the Sun says, he's celebrating the budget because the sugar tax is going to ripple around the world. Well, he said a few more things, actually. He said, well done, guys, we did it, a sugar levy on sugary sweetened drinks, profound move that will ripple around the world. Business cannot come between our kids. I think he means and health. Our kids' health comes first. Bold, brave, logical, supported by all the right people. Now bring on the whole strategy soon to come. So the question is, Mike, what is the whole strategy he's talking about? And who are the right people that have been supporting this? This is not about sugar. This is about artificial sweeteners. And if we have a look at the experts, of course, we can go onto the NHS website. And what they're actually doing is promoting aspartame and other sweeteners. Well, we've also got charities dismissing all the risks. And I've just chosen Alzheimer's here. I think it's a good one to go for. If you have a look at the American site, they say that between 2000 and 2013, Alzheimer deaths are up 71%. But that statistic is itself only based on a disclosure rate of 45%. So the implication is it could be much higher. And they're saying that it's costing the US care system $226 billion at the moment and $1 trillion by 2050. They're saying it kills more than breast and prostate cancer combined. It can't be slowed, stopped or prevented. It's inevitable, Mike. They don't know what causes it, but it's inevitable. And then if you have a look at the mainstream site, they start to have a look at some of the possible causes, but these are all dismissed. Aspartame, flu jabs and dental fillings. So if you get into this, it's all absolutely dismissed.
Yeah.
But you've been having a look at some of this as well. Let's bring in this lady, a very brave French campaigner called Corinne Gouget. She was absolutely outstanding in warning against the dangers of artificial sweeteners. Aspartame was just one of them. She helped very many people, including getting people who were confined to wheelchairs walking simply by removing them from artificial sweeteners. And she's been working, or was working, with this lady, Dr. Betty Martini. And you can have a look at the Mission Possible website with document after document by qualified medical people and other experts warning of the risks of artificial sweeteners. I've got to say that we learnt over the weekend that tragically Corrinne Gouget committed suicide or died under suspicious circumstances on the 22nd of June 2015 in southern France. And she'd also, of course, been put under huge pressure by the fact that British family courts had denied her access to her children for many years. So we were very sad to learn about the death of this lady, and it's prompted us to get back looking at what's happening with artificial sweeteners, and we'd encourage people to go on the internet and have a look at her work and, of course, the work of Dr. Betty Martini. Well, we're being nudged, I think, a bit on this subject, Mike.
We are, because here's the Behavioural Insights team, and they've written a blog post about this. One of the most striking announcements in this week's UK budget, they say, was the introduction of a new soft drinks levy, quickly dubbed the sugar tax, which will come into force in 2018. New taxes aren't usually associated with the Behavioural Insights team, particularly because their preference is to find simpler, non-regulatory solutions before reaching for the regulatory levers, but also because changing people's economic incentives by imposing a tax is not a nudge in the classic definition. But we think that taxes can have an important role to play in encouraging behavioural change, especially when combined with other measures. Think about the effect of tax on smoking. We also think that behavioural science can teach us a huge amount about how the levy should be implemented and what its effects are likely to be. So they go through the effects for producers and the effects for consumers. And of course, the single biggest effect that they talk about with regard to producers is that producers will be forced to reformulate their drinks and use much more low-calorie sweeteners. Producers are likely to respond by reformulating their existing products, and we think this will be where they're likely to see the biggest health impacts. And I think that's absolutely right. We are going to see huge health impacts because if obesity is the excuse for removing sugar from people's diets, once people replace that sugar with these artificial sweeteners, I think we're going to see massive holes appearing in people's brains. Brian?
Well, this is it. And of course, Corrinne Gouget and Dr. Betty Martini warning that basically the low diet drinks were the ones causing people to become fat with all sorts of added implications. So joint problems, memory problems, coordination problems, neurological problems. Evidence there, but all totally dismissed by the industry, brutally suppressed in some cases. But fascinating, we've now got the Behavioural Insights team, which UK column has been warning about for years, now coming in on the subject of health. And just have a look at this, kindly sent to us by a lady this morning. It's an article from New Scientist. It's all about the government's nudge unit, the applied behavioural psychology team, going to make long-lasting changes to a person's thought processes. So this was part of the article. They're now talking about wise psychological interventions, WPIs. They're going to make quite a difference. They're going to make these long-lasting changes to the way people think and short-term changes to their environment. So I'm just going to put that in twice so that we don't forget it. But they're not talking about just changing the way you think for a couple of days on an important subject. They're saying long-lasting changes. So we've got bent, perverted, criminal MPs driving a system. Of course, this is coming through the Cabinet Office. We're talking about Oliver Letwin and Francis Maud driving a body which is boasting that it can interfere with the way people think, not just in the short term, but in the long term And what are they going to do? Promote children to drink non-sugar drinks? It's genocide with a small g at the moment, I think.
So what's this?
Sorry, this is, this is about mind control bit, basically, because we've got a big attack coming in on Corbyn that the Labour Party is becoming anti-Semitic. The man driving this is Lord Levy. We just like to remind people, of course, this is the man with all sorts of articles in the press over cash for honours. And of course, here he is having a very close tete-a-tete with Tony Blair. But the implication is that if you speak out about presumably Israel or what the Jewish community, you are going to be screened out of the Labour Party as anti-Semitic. So we've got the nudge unit, which is twisting behind the scenes. We've now got the fact that free speech, we don't want it in any of the political parties, presumably. And I'll bring it back to this man, because here he is, Chris Bryant. Now, just remember that he's laughing and joking in Parliament about the dangers of sugar. This is his election agent who was jailed for some of the worst pictures of child pornography the police have ever seen. Of course, Chris Bryant didn't know anything about that. And he's written a book which is now advertising that really, over the years, anything and everything goes in Parliament, and it's all a bit of a joke, Mike. So don't worry.
Well, that probably explains why we've got to protect the accused, because the accused deserve protection, according to Harvey, Proctor here, and I think the photograph and the eyes say it all in this.
It's incredible, isn't it?
It is incredible. He's saying recent sex abuse claims against innocent men are proof that our laws need to be amended urgently. After my experience these past 13 months, I hope no one will think I'm being presumptuous in writing this open letter. I've had the daunting burden of being accused of being a child serial murderer, a child rapist and sexual and physical abuser of children by the Metropolitan Police Service, and a key complainant, Nick, who the Metropolitan Police Service's detectives described as being credible and true. It is not an experience I would recommend. And he goes on to discuss Bernard Hogan Howe. He says Bernard Hogan Howe's view has changed, however. His new view that police officers should not believe unconditionally what anyone tells them is common sense and long overdue. And he says, finally, and this is really the most obnoxious part of the whole article, finally, with regard to the felonious notion that there was a Westminster or VIP paedophile ring in operation in the years of Margaret Thatcher's administrations, some of your number, and he's talking about about Parliament here, some of your number who have courted press attention and constituency idolatry by their outlandish, false and self-seeking declarations should return to the floor of the House of Commons and apologise. The likes of Tom Watson, John Mann and Zach Goldsmith should hang their heads in shame. Well, Mr. Proctor, I'm sorry to say I disagree with you, absolutely. It is true to say that everyone is entitled to be presumed innocent until they're proven guilty. However, what you're talking about is a handful of people who have been brought into the public eye to face accusations of paedophilia, as opposed to the thousands and thousands and thousands of people who have had their lives destroyed by the fact that the police have failed to investigate properly the allegations that they made. This is not about officers believing unconditionally anything. This is about officers being forced in recent months to look at allegations which have been ignored for decades. So let's deal with the allegations in a proper way, and then perhaps investigate them properly, and then perhaps we can look at other issues. But in the meantime, I think anybody who's been on the wrong end of this, it's quite unfortunate, but at the end of the day, a lot more people have been on the wrong end of the fact that these investigations haven't been done in the first place.
Yeah. And of course, it's pretty typical that the Telegraph gives Mr. Proctor the chance to speak. Telegraph doesn't give a major article to Melanie Shaw or any of the other child abuse survivors. We only want to hear from the great and good in Westminster, who of course hold their hand up and say nothing to see here, nothing going on.
Right, underneath this article, I do advise people to look at it. There is a timeline produced by the Telegraph listing all the people that have had false allegations, in inverted commas, made against them. There's no presumption of innocence is there, but there's no evidence that these are false allegations because the investigation hasn't taken place properly.
Well, that's the way it's done, and timing is everything. And we were very pleased to receive this letter from Robert Green, who sent it to Teresa May. The date is the 16th of March 2016. You can obviously pause your screens later to have a full read through this letter. But what Robert Green is saying in this particular text is that he's questioning the suitability of Eilish Angelini, former Scottish Procurator Fiscal, for heading up the inquiry of deaths into police custody, because, as Robert is saying, her credentials appear wrong. So when she was informed of the abuse of Hollie Greig, on one hand, she says that she didn't know anything about it. Documents clearly show that she does. And then the solicitor that she uses to protect herself against questions from the public is Peter Watson, who is himself under the spotlight for possible fraud charges over Heather Capital. So Robert quite rightly pointing out here that basically it would appear Eilish Angelini is not suitable, and can Teresa May justify her appointment? Robert also says points out down at the bottom that out of the 22 people that Hollie Greig named as being responsible for abuse, the police simply failed to interview any of them. And here we've got a classic example, Mike, of the fact that when it comes to child abuse, you solve the crime by not investigating, and then, of course, there's no substance in the accusation. And this is another part, another part of the letter. And basically, Robert is pointing out the involvement of Kenny McCaskill, who confirmed that Dame Eilish Angelini had intervened in the case. So we'll wait and see what happens. Teresa May, of course, likes to advertise herself as helping children. Here she is with Action for Children, but the reality is she's not doing anything for children at all. She's helping to protect the establishment. So there we are, child abuse in Westminster, nothing to see, nothing really happened. Testimony from tens of thousands of survivors of that abuse, nothing to see. Of course, in the shadows, what is going on is that local authorities are now making, I'm going to use the word obscene payments of £10,000 to buy off abuse victims who've had their complete lives destroyed. What are they getting? A one-off payment of £10,000, £15,000, £20,000. Meanwhile, the abusers are protected by our own politicians. It's pretty disgusting stuff. We remember, of course, that the same politicians are responsible for this. So we're now starting to see really horrific abuse within the British Armed Forces. This article, 2 young soldiers are forced to rape each other as part of a beasting ceremony into the Queen's Guards. They're apparently known as the Gay Company. Now, I don't think this is simply a gay issue, because if we remind ourselves, it was the politicians, Tony Blair, it would appear, was certainly one of them, Jeff Hoon was in post, plus these other senior military officers who approved Satanism for use in the British Armed Forces. Not only did they approve it, they then promoted the people involved. So this is the reality of Britain's political system, pro-Satanism, and of course we're now reaping all that means. We could have a look at this man, of course, Oliver Col-vile. He's been very big on hedgehogs, but at the same time he's been voting to cut benefits. And this particular image is now circulating on the internet, where people are being encouraged to get in contact with Mr. Col-vile to express their views over the Tory benefit cuts. We'd like to say, as always, the best way to get your point across is politely with facts and in a reasonable manner. But I find it very interesting that the public is now cottoning on to the fact What is this man doing, do you think, Mike? Do you think he's nudging the public onto hedgehogs while something else happens?
I think that's exactly what he's doing.
Taking people's attention off real matters.
Yes.
Yeah.
And perhaps this is one of the real matters, because obviously the number of suicides amongst veterans continues to climb, and not just on this side of the Atlantic, but this is NHS England. They've launched a public consultation. They say that they provide 12 mental health services across England specifically for veterans, but those services are due to end in September 2016. And so they're taking this opportunity to ask for comment on what people think about them. They say, what you say will help us build on the strengths of our current mental health service for veterans and develop our future services. The NHS wants to hear from anyone who has opinions to offer, and particularly from people who have served in the armed forces, from family members and carers, and from staff and organisations. I'm not really going to make any more comment on this other than just to make the point that it's happening, and if anybody wants to get involved, search for the Developing Mental Health Services for Veterans in England.
And that is all, of course, based on the fact that there's a vast increase in mental health problems in veterans, which we don't appear to want to investigate.
No, we want to deal with it afterwards, but we don't want to understand the causes.
No.
This is from a few days ago, but I wanted to highlight it here because it was just something I came across on my mind. So UK prison population, biggest in Western Europe. In a comparison of 50 European countries, the Guardian saying Britain is behind only Russia and Turkey in the number of prisoners. So we've got 95,248, which is 20,000 more than France, which has got an equivalent population, and 30,000 more than Germany. And this is according to the latest Council of Europe figures. So I just wanted to remind everybody, we still have indeterminate prison sentences in this country. And just in case you don't understand how these work, basically this is people who end up in prison with no release date on the day that they go in. And sometimes this is based on the notion of public protection. There can be other reasons for it as well, just there at Her Majesty's pleasure. That's what that means. There's no fixed term. And in many, many cases, people are in prison in this country. And the deal is that you stay there until you admit your guilt. And once you've admitted your guilt, you may start the process of release and so on. But the fact of the matter is that according to somebody I was visiting in prison a number of years ago, Martin Smith, there were quite a number of people this was in Strangeways prison in Manchester, quite a number of people in there who absolutely claimed their innocence. All they needed to do in order to get into the probation system was to admit their guilt and go through the process. Yeah. But they refused to admit their guilt. And for the life of me, Brian, I cannot imagine a scenario where anybody, no matter what crime they committed, would be willing to languish in prison
if they'd actually
carried out the crime, yes. Yeah. So it seems to me that part of the reason that we have the largest number of people in Europe in prison is because we have a lot of people in there that are basically innocent.
They're innocent, and we also know, of course, that there's a black prison system by which people end up in prison without having gone through a full and proper judicial process. And we certainly know of people who've been in prison and they've then been released from prison with no proper process. They were described by warders as special prisoners. But the inference is that basically people can be put in prison without any proper form of judicial process at all. So,
and in fact, there's one person comes to our monthly meetings who has spent time in prison, and when he came out, he discovered he does not have a criminal record. Yes. And how can you not have a criminal record and yet have been in prison? This is a very strange situation. Right, Yemen, United Nations Human Rights Commissioner here. This is the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Zaid Ra'ad Al Hussein, commenting on the killings of civilians in Yemeni airstrikes. He's saying, in the wake of another deadly airstrike that killed some 106 civilians in a crowded village market in northwestern Yemen. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights on Friday condemned the repeated failure of the coalition forces to take effective action to prevent the recurrence of such incidents and to publish transparent, independent investigations into those that have already occurred. Now, this comes at the end of a couple of weeks of conferences on the issue of Yemen in Geneva, which Vanessa Beeley was at. Now, Vanessa is going to be joining us in a day or two's time to talk about this. But in the meantime, if you want to go on her blog, The Wall Will Fall, there is a page there with some videos from the 2 weeks of meetings at the UN Human Rights in Geneva, and do have a look at those. And then, Syria continues, and in the meantime, Syria seems to be mostly experiencing a ceasefire which works. Interestingly, the Russians saying that the only areas that are seeing any kind of breach of the ceasefire at the moment are those held by ISIS or al-Nusra. But despite the fact that Russia has clearly had a positive effect on the situation in Syria, the British vitriol and the British, well, I can imagine a number of different words for this, continues, and they continue to try to poke a stick at Russia. So this is Philip Hammond talking about Russia. He says, 2 years ago today, Russia tried to legitimize its illegal occupation of Crimea with a unilateral treaty to absorb the peninsula. In reality, it was a land grab, pure and simple. By annexing Ukraine's land, violating its territorial integrity and destabilizing East Ukraine, Russia has contravened international law and challenged the rules-based international order. Did you know we had a rules-based international order?
No.
I haven't seen Britain or America paying too much attention to it recently, but anyway, such actions are simply not acceptable, according to Hammond. This is why we're standing firm against this dangerous behaviour and responding to the serious and strategic way that this challenge demands, including sustaining our sanctions on Russia. Our position is clear. We do not and will not recognise Russia's illegal takeover of Crimea, nor will we forget the continuing human rights abuses, blah, 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 blah. And then he goes on to say the illegal annexation of Crimea was an act of aggression, and in the face of this aggression, we must stand united in defence of our values. I'm not quite sure what Philip Hammond's values are.
Well, if you look at the government as a whole, they must be criminal values. They're certainly going to be untrue.
And he ends by saying, I call on Russia to end its occupation and return Crimea to Ukraine. Perhaps we could make comments about Libya, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Afghanistan.
Yeah. I think Hammond is completely, they don't know what to do with Russia because Russia has played the diplomacy in Syria so well that they're almost just throwing anything they can at Russia. So maybe we ought to say if we've got an overseas audience today and any Russian people are watching our broadcast, then Mr. Hammond, of course, is not speaking for the British people. He's speaking for a corrupt and criminal conservative government in my book. Well, there we are. That is the news. It's clearly getting very serious in UK. We watch the forthcoming EU referendum with interest. Is that going to be rigged? We think it will be. We'll be reporting more on that. And don't forget, it's all gone quiet on the subject of child abuse, but of course that is the real machinery by which politicians, senior civil servants, senior police judges and others are controlled in order to get the real political agenda to work. So don't forget the child abuse victims. We'll be back same time tomorrow.
Yeah, just a reminder, no Corrinne report or Fracking Nightmare tonight. Ian will, and because it's Easter next weekend, we won't be operating on Friday or Monday. So Ian will be back tomorrow week, next Tuesday.
Okay, thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.